The other thing is age. Okay, so the age is extremely important in your microculture because depending on when you were born, it also decides what experiences you had, right? So many kids that you are dealing with now were babies during 9/11, right? So they have no idea, but you probably can think, where was I? Right? You remember that. You remember the aftermath of news that lasted for 3 months, right? You remember the president declaring war. You remember him declaring that the victory was here, right? You remember the surge. You remember how that may have done to you and the people you love. So those things impact your culture and your microculture. And you want to begin to think about, how you are in your cultural space. So when you did the cultural pie, this also influenced it, right? Many of us stayed at a very surface level. It's time for us to go a little deeper in our culture and ask ourselves questions about our experiences. One of the things a caveat I would talk to you about in your experiences is that I travel the world nicely. In fact, I'm in another country every year. But one of the things I've learned is that when I'm traveling with colleagues who are of the majority, who are white, if they don't go in as a minority without power, their experience is not different from any experience in the U.S., right? So, for instance, I traveled with a delegation to Mexico, and the delegation was very multicultural. But we went in as delegates, as educators, as all of these things from the United States of America to the country of Mexico, right? And when we went in, I saw clearly that no one, not even no one in the culture was going in as a minority, even though we were the minority, right? So when we went into places, we went in with our Americanism, we went in with the pride of our Americanism, and we stepped in with our deficit theory and thinking as Americans that this is Mexico, okay, where all those immigrants come from. And we're coming in here to help y'all to fix this, right? So when it was cultural experiences, we were still in our what? In our majority. Here I am as somebody who deals in multicultural education, stepping back thinking, oh my goodness, we don't even see this beautiful culture because we are here in our majority. And this is what happens when we take vacations, right? It's called a vacation syndrome. So you go off to Cancun, you are there for one reason and one reason only, to be served and to relax, right? And in that space, most people visit cultures to be served and to relax. And so therefore, even though you may be the minority in a country, you have no clue of what it feels like to be a minority. So I said to teachers, you have to go into a place where you are minority without power. So if I take you to Ghana, West Africa, you walk in without any power, right? Without the power of the American power source, without the power of a white American or even a black American. You walk in just simply as a person. And when you realize that, you realize what it's like to be, or at least a semblance of what it's like to be in a minority status. We can flip this and go right to South Africa, where the whites are the vast minority, but they are the minority with power. So when you're a minority with power, you do not understand what it's like to be the minority. Therefore, your experiences, when you go places, you still can understand it. So as someone who does a lot of traveling, it baffled me in the beginning of my travels when I hear people saying, oh, I've been here and I've been there. I'm like, but when I hear you talking, it hasn't changed. You haven't changed the way. If you've been there, you should have. And I thought, wait a minute, you went in with power. And you did not lay it down, or you did not have an opportunity, or nobody taught you to go in humbly without power, right? And so being well traveled does not mean that you are culturally competent. And so I want you to begin to think about that. Just because you've flown all over the world, if you haven't flown all over the world in humility and pulled away power, and sometimes it's hard when you're white and you're in Europe. Doesn't matter, right? Because if you didn't talk, they wouldn't know where you were, and you still walk in that same power, right? But you can go to Turkey, you can go to Israel, you can go to Egypt, you can go anywhere. And if you're going in to learn, to be honest, to understand the experience of a minority, then you have to go in without that power. All right, so let's run through this very, very quickly. Internal cultural competence. First of all, we have to get to the internal, your thought life. How are you thinking? What are your processes in thinking? As we talked about earlier, dealing with the cross-cultural model, thinking about how you're thinking. What contributes to the tenacity of those thoughts? All right, and this is a continuous, this thinking is continuous. You're always thinking. The other thing is self-dialogue. Psychologically, we always are having a dialogue with ourselves, and we're supposed to, and it's very natural, and it's very human, and it's very needed, right? And this dialogue is always continuous, right? It never stops. You're always talking about everything that happens to you. It has to go in your mind because that's what your mind does. Remember, it's categorizing, it's processing, it's putting things here, it's putting things there. It's trying to make sense of things. We need to have meta thinking. So meta thinking is thinking about how I'm thinking, right? And if you find yourself doing some stinking thinking, then you want to change it, especially when children come in, right? So you child walk in, and you go, she ghetto. Or, why is she talking like that? Or why is she so loud? All right? That's thinking, right? You have to begin to say, okay, stop. Why am I thinking that way? Why am I thinking that about that person? Right? Well, she might be loud, but she also may be the person that you need to be working with, right? Or you know, when kids are coming in, or when other faculty, you'll be like, now, why is she wearing that? Right? Stop that thinking, because what that's going to do. Remember, if it gets into that box and that box does not have any perforation in it, what she's wearing is going to become the person you believe she is. And then you're going to begin to move in that space and treat her the way you put. So if she came in there dressed like what you think is a skank or whatever you think it is, then guess what? She goes into that box and she has to fight her way out of that box, not even knowing she has to fight her way out of that box in your thinking. So you have to stop and say, wait a minute, stop thinking like that. Goodness gracious, this could be the best student ever. Got it? And I'm not giving her a chance to do that. And the thing is that one of the things you can't do is you can't accept that type of internal dialogue. You can't allow yourself to grow it or to box it, right? So it's coming and you know, okay, wait a minute, that's prejudicial. That's racist. I shouldn't be thinking that way. And then that's when you have to begin to challenge, why am I thinking like that? What created, what in my life experience? Remember your subculture and your microculture. What in my life supported this type of thinking? I have to begin to break this thinking down, right? So that when it comes in, I don't box people into these spaces and that space and not give them a chance, or have to wait until them to prove themselves that they're not in that space. Can you imagine my students seeing me run first before they saw me stand before them as a lecturer, right? If they saw me only running every day, they're like, oh, I'm afraid of him. And then they come into a class and be like, oh my gosh, it's the runner, right? Right, then I would have to prove that I am not who they thought I was. By the virtue of the situation, it'll change a lot, but then I would have to continue to prove that. Next thing is culture. So culture, here are my definitions, is the integrated patterns of behavior, right? Integrated means that these patterns have been infused in people. Your students, they've been infused in you. And then this also includes the cultural categories that I gave you. So culture includes all of those categories. And then, of course, competence. This is just simply having the capacity, right? Having the capacity to function effectively as an individual, right? So as an individual, you're competent when you can function effectively. So how do you function effectively in a classroom? What does it look like when students come into your classroom? You're functioning ineffectively if you're not culturally competent, right? That means You're not competent. You're not competent in the ways of helping children, young children who are 4 and 5 who are just learning life. You have people who are, marginalizing them, right? Well, why didn't you know that? You know your colors? I mean, and then you get upset. I'm gonna be real with you. Out of the 5 years I taught preschool, I was not mad at one of those children one day. How can you get mad at a 5-year or 4-year? You got socks older than those children, right? You have shoes older than 5 years old. These kids only been on the planet for 4 and 5 years old. So whatever they do is right there where they should be. It's developmentally appropriate. I would laugh because just like what Dr. Glass was saying, you have to flip, and what Dr. Lewis was saying, flip this mindset. Why are you getting upset with a 5-year-old? Who does that, right? I mean, yes, they can work on nerve. They can be a little annoying. But at the end of the day, upset is never a behavior a teacher should have. That's developmentally inappropriate. These children are too young to understand the full the ram of life. We used to say when I taught preschool, do not put your adult mind into that child's body. So when the child seems to act like an adult or say things that adult says, the child is doing what? Simply mirroring what they've heard. They are simply a mirror. They don't know what it's like to really cuss. They don't understand the visceral feeling that adults get when they do that. They're just simply modeling. But boy, let them do it in your classroom. Let them do it in that preschool. You'll think, oh my God, look at her fast self. She'll be pregnant by the time she's 14. And if she keep hearing that, right? Teachers are saying that. Trust me. Been in a preschool, I've heard it. Teaching kindergarten, first, second, third, I've heard it. The kids get any earshot of that, what happens, right? You just marginalize them further. So we have to be very, very careful about our competence and being able to function effectively. Meaning when things come in our mind, we shut it out and we certainly don't say it, right? And we also have to watch our behavior because guess what? If it gets into one of those category boxes that have no holes in it, no matter that we don't say it, we will do what? Begin to act it, right? It's going to come out. And that's how kids go, she don't really like me. She's saying that, but she don't really like me. Because guess what? Her behavior is showing me otherwise, even though her mouth is saying something different. So internal cultural competence is the process of critically examining yourself. So you have to struggle with your personal beliefs, your dispositions, your attitudes, your prejudices, and how all of those relates to your students, to the policies of your school, right? To the principles of your school, and to your actions. You have to begin to think about those things. Culturally responsive or internal cultural competence is not a destination. Got it? It's a journey. It's an ongoing process that we all, every situation you get in, you go like, okay, where am I in this situation? Right? I still do that when I'm watching the news. Like, okay, don't think that. That's not gonna work. Because if I ever meet that person or ever get in front of that, then I have this in my box, and this is what I believe this person is, and I got to fight to let that person have any space with me when they could be the person to make me a millionaire. I'll never know, right? So we want to begin to think about if you're going to be culturally competent, you're going to first of all be academically and culturally ready, right? You're going to know your academic skills. You're going to be competent of the Common Core. You cannot be internal cultural competent without knowing the Common Core. You're going to be able to provide responsive lessons, and you're going to, of course, operate in a non-biased way towards your students. Because you're going to take those thoughts, and before they get there, you're going to throw them out and go, okay, I'm not going to do that, right? If it's a thought that I want to take in, I'll make sure it's not in a box that cannot be moved out. Because as we've grown up, we know that we categorize people in boxes in our families and in our experience. So here are the top 10 things that internal cultural competence requires. First, understanding that diversity has many levels and complexities. You saw all of the cultural components. Inside of each of those, there are a lot more things that you have to deal with. So it's not just that linear line. It is very, very complex. And think about yourself. You're complex individuals, right? Your I am statements show that. There's no one thing that can describe you, even though as humans we categorize each other. or we categorize for the sake of making sense of things. Number 9, you must admit when you don't know and you misunderstood. Okay, when my Somalian students came in, I knew where the country was. I had no idea what the culture was. And I just admitted it. And my second grader was too young to really talk to me, but his brother was in high school and he would pick him up and I'm like, well, what's going on in the country? I looked up the news and there's this war, and so he began to talk to me about it. I'm like, oh, there's subscripting soldiers, children soldiers, right? And this was in the late 90s. I'm like, wow. And I said, so how did you all? He said, well, the U.S. has opened up their borders for refugees. I had no idea this influx of Somalian students were coming in as the refugees of war. But that gave me a whole new perspective of why my students were acting certain ways and where they were coming from, right? I didn't know. How many of you have children? And as parents, how many of you ever said to your kid, could you help me out with this? What happened to that child? They became instantly what? The expert. So that's what Dr. Glass is talking about. These kids, as soon as you say, in my house, electronics, I go, Michaela, do something with this, right? Okay, and or Caleb, my son, I go, here, I don't understand how to do this. The thing is frozen. So yesterday the computer was frozen. He was like, oh, you need to do. I was like, oh. He's like, see, Dad, anytime you need something, just call me. It's like, I certainly will, right? So, no, this is the 11-year-old. So the thing is that when I show him that I need help, and he said I get to help the man who is supposed to be the one who's helping me, it is so powerful for him to do that. The same thing happens in the classroom. You mean you need me to help you? Wow, and you really need it. It's not this false, made-up situation. No, I really need you to help because my computer frozen, and I don't understand how to get it out. Or you got these, my daughter said, Dad, are you on Twitter? I don't understand. But this is how you do it. I'm like, oh, well, could you keep working with me on that? Because I don't have time to be thinking about that. Oh, of course. She's a teenager, so yeah, would you want me to tweet something? In fact, my children love to ride with me because when they're riding with me, they have my cell phone. I say, okay, now could you text Dr. Glass? And so, of course, people know that they are texting them because they don't spell stuff like I do and they don't make complete sentences. Like, that is certainly not me. But they love that. They love being able to help in those little simple things when you really, really need them. Okay? And so you want to begin to think about that when you're dealing with I don't understand or I don't know. How many of y'all really like writing on the board? You know, boards are becoming passe now. Why don't you I used to have my third graders. I said, okay, this is what I need you to put on the board. Ooh, they thought that was the best thing since sliced bread. They were the teacher writing on the board. I'm thinking, thank God you're doing it. And I said, listen, you got to write it as neat as possible because everybody, I got it. One of my, I had a young man and a young lady that used to love doing the board writing. Like I told my teachers, when I teach them, I said, listen, by February of every month, I didn't teach from February to March. I created the lesson plans, and I said, all right, this is what y'all supposed to be doing today. I will facilitate. Those students who need remediation come with me. The rest of y'all, that means peace. Y'all. Talk to me when you need me, right? And the kids actually taught themselves all through the school year and, of course, passed that end of course exam every year, right? But it was because I was really into mutually directed activities. Listen, this is really your classroom. I'm just here to facilitate, right? After I learned not to be such a clean crazy. The next one is anti-bias stance. Remember, taking those thoughts, throwing them away. That's how you stand in an anti-bias space, right? So any type of bias is problematic, and you want to stand in that space. Acknowledgement of outsider disposition. That's extremely important. You walk into a classroom, you have the power. You set the tone of the culture, but you still may be an outsider. You cannot force your culture, map it onto a child just because you have the authority. Remember the substitute teacher? So he brought his culture into the class. He didn't even think about who the students were, right? He told them initially, I am from an urban school and I don't take any junk, right? So this is how it's going to operate. Did you even look at the classroom? Did you realize when you drove up Did you understand anything about the culture of the school? No, right? But we do that, right? We come in because I'm the teacher, you got to respect me. Now, you know that's 1956 kind of mentality, right? I'm an adult, so that means I automatically get respect. What world are you? Oh, that ain't the world. That's not 214, right? It's not 2014. And it's not, right, it's not this population of students. But it has never been that clear in any culture that just because you're older, you get the respect, right? There is some spaces for eldership, but when you're in a relationship, this relationship has to be built for the respect. So you want to make sure you go in and say, you know what, I don't know these cultures. I am an outsider. Show me how to get in, right? Let the students help you with that. Explore and respect cultural concepts, right? So you want to respect these concepts of their cultures and these beliefs, the ones that are similar to yours and the ones that are different. You want to really begin to say, okay, that's not what I believe in. That's a little different. But I can respect that, right? And what I often tell my teachers is you have to get to a place where, and we talk about it clearly in my classroom, when religion is mapped onto this, number 6, it becomes extremely problematic, right? So let's just play that little game right there. So the cultural concept and beliefs that are different or unique than yours. So say, I'm going to have to do it, say you are a Christian, which many of you said you were. You said I am, but y'all don't know that. And I'm going to hold you to your own Christian stuff, right? You called yourself that, don't? I didn't. So all y'all so-called Christians. Mm-hmm. So how do you square the circle of 2 moms? Go ahead. See, this is reality, right? So they're in your classroom, and you just came from church on Sunday. You also read Romans, whatever. I can't tell you that I'm a Christian, but anyway. How do you square that circle? And see, my students, who are pre-service teachers, we have to deal with that. So how do you square the circle when you're going to the exploration of and respect for cultural concepts or beliefs that are different than yours? How do you explore that culture, and how do you respect it, and still be a Christian? That's something for you to think about. We ain't gonna get into that deep today, okay? But I will give you a short answer. Now there is somewhere in your Bible, y'all Christians. I'm trying to remember where it is, but I don't know because I don't know if I'm a Christian or not. I can't share that with y'all. But it says to give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So Caesar is the what? Government. When you are a teacher, you're an agent of the state of North Carolina. So you give unto North Carolina what is North Carolina's, right? Got it? I think that's somewhere in your book. But we'll talk about that later. All right? Keep on moving down. Number 5, dismantle false consensus effect bias, right? So what in the world is false consensus effect? Anybody know besides Dr. Stalker? False consensus effect is the effect of everybody in here believing X about Y. So for instance, all of you in here believe that I'm a Christian. But suppose that is false. Guess what? Because all of you believe it, because Tori is going to go over to Cheryl and say, yeah, he is. Mm-hmm. Then Cheryl can go to Kim and say, he is. Then Kim go up there to Tori and say, you know what? He is. And then everybody believe the same thing that could be what? False. What happens to a child who is going through an elementary school and every teacher believes that he is this? He is doomed to what? Or doomed to pass if the teachers believe it. That's false consensus effect. Be careful, because guess where it's nurtured? The little petri dish where it's nurtured and born in the teacher's lounge, right? That little nasty place. I mean, as a man, I had excuses not to go in there because they were always talking about husbands and stuff that I didn't even want to deal with. So I never went in the teacher's lounge in my elementary school. I just ate lunch in the classroom, and I can't even remember I don't even remember how it looks because I never went in there, right? It was a ladies' space. But the couple of times I went in, I'm like, oh my goodness, gee whiz, I can't. This is poison. This is getting all in my mind. I can't take it. I'm not coming back in here again. They crazy. No wonder the kids are. No wonder I have all 25 black boys in my classroom along with my 25 students. You think it's a joke? Go on, Miss. I would turn around. I'm like, why are you at my door? Come on in. 2 minutes later, come. Just tell her to send all of them down here so I can stop. Just send them all in here, right? Because my principal said, you send them to me, I'm going to send you to the office. That's what we told the teachers. You want the student to come to the office, you got to come to the office. I was like, oh, well, all right then. That was a new principal. He turned the school around. You have to continue to go back to internal cultural competence. We do this in our schools. We, the teachers, the grown-ups, we create this culture because no one is having these no one is looking at, why am I doing this? Why am I thinking like this? Why am I talking like this? Next one is respect foreign languages and different behavior norms. I'm going to be short because we're going to have to fly through. Listen, those students who are coming to your classroom who speak, let's just say Spanish, and then are able to speak English, they have more mental gymnastics than you monolingual people ever will have. Now, that's if you're monolingual. Some of y'all might be bilingual, trilingual, whatever. But please, you're talking about intelligence to think. How many of y'all are bilingual or have a efficient in another language? Oh, well, all right. All right, well, yeah. So I guess you would never understand what it's like to think in another language, translate it, and then move into another language. And when you see kids, how many of y'all ever seen children speak one language to somebody and flip and speak the English to you? Can you imagine the mental? I mean, for me, I just get goosebumps and I'm like, God, how did you? Goodness gracious, that's awesome, right? It is so awesome. But guess what we do to that? Oh, no, you have to speak English. Or you look down on that. Oh, you can't even talk. Right? We cannot do that because the mental capacity it takes for them to switch back and forth like that is astounding, right? You want to begin to say, how do you capitalize on that type of thinking? Then you have to dismantle actor-observer bias. So let's get actor-observer for you. Now, I'm just going to give you a scenario instead of giving you this long, limited definition. So I'm driving to work, and I have my hot tea in my hand, and I'm turning, and a little of the tea spill, and I'm like, oh, my goodness, and I swerve the car and try to get on the lane, and then I put it back, and the person behind me pulls up beside me and gives me a finger that I should not be getting. And I'm thinking, well, I'm sorry. I mean, but of course he didn't know it. 2 weeks later, I'm driving, and this person cuts me off, and but you know, I might be a Christian, so I'm like, well, what am I supposed to say now, right? I'm feeling like, I know you didn't just cut. Really? So active observer is that. When somebody else does it, they got issues. When you do it, oh, you got the excuses. Valid excuses, right? So if you yell at your students, it's because they deserve it, they need it, right? Because they are this and they are that. But let somebody yell at your child. Oh, no, your teacher did what, sweetie? Oh, well, okay, let's call the principal right now. Well, let me get, they did what? I'm on my way up there right now, right? Even though I just yelled at my students, right? So active observer bias is that it is all right for me, but it's not all right for you. It is a result of my condition or situation, but it's a result of your condition. So I'm only acting like this because it's my situation. You're acting like that because it's a condition, right? It's who you are. That's active observer. It's hypocritical.